Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, inflation cooled in July, but prices are still rising for many. As governments try to spend what we send better, are they on the right track? Plus, Ontario's Minister of Finance on protecting the province's interests. That's all ahead. First, for the week that was in business, it's time for the briefs. There was a stark warning this week about the impact of tariffs on small businesses. The CFIB said businesses already hit by the steel and aluminum tariffs, which now face the removal of the $800 duty-free exemption for U.S. imports, don't have much runway left, and that 1 in 5 facing extra tariff costs say they may not last beyond 6 months if nothing changes. Headline inflation fell in July in Canada to 1.7%, driven by a steep drop in gas prices. Other prices were still rising, including groceries, which were up 3.4% overall, and shelter costs, which reversed recent declines with a 3% increase. The core rate of inflation is still 2.6%, inside the bank's target range, but high enough to potentially block a rate cut in September. There are some signs the number of consumers struggling with debt has leveled off slightly. Equifax Canada says 1.4 million consumers missed a credit payment in second quarter. That's down slightly from the first 3 months of the year. Canadians without a mortgage are more likely to miss a credit payment. Home prices in Canada fell for a 6th consecutive month, according to the Terranet National Bank Index, down 2.6% overall in July compared to last year, with Toronto down 7.5% and Vancouver down 4.3%. 8 of the 11 cities in the index did gain in price, though. Quebec City was up almost 17%, Edmonton up 5.3%. Even in cities with declines, prices remain out of reach for many. A tentative deal put a swift end to a strike by Air Canada's flight attendants, with more than half of the airline's scheduled flights back in the air by Friday and a ramp-up expected to take up to a week or two. Air Canada said that 500,000 customers' flights had been canceled due to the strike. The new 4-year deal would see workers paid for the work they do on the ground as well as in the air. The federal government has tapped a Toronto-based AI startup, Cohere, to help find efficiencies using AI. A memorandum of understanding between the two could see Cohere develop specific cost-saving tools for the public sector. Cohere is valued at $6.8 billion U.S. And those are your business briefs. Inflation remains sticky in Canada, and it's not all tariff-related. Will the central bank ever get a green light to lower rates? Benjamin Tal is Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC. Thanks for being with us, Ben.
A pleasure. Thank you.
So we do see, even as the headline looks a little bit better, some of those core items now perhaps driven by weather, climate change, droughts. The grocery store remains a place of stickiness. Were you thinking the bank might be heading toward a rate cut in September? What's your current view?
Yes, we think that the bank will cut in September because if you look at the last 3-4 months, the trend is downward. I think that the economy is on the verge of a recession. We are in a per capita recession. Inflation is close enough to 2%. It's time to cut. I think that they should have cut before, but I think that February is now very reasonable. I know that the market is pricing in a 50% probability of a cut. I think the Bank of Canada will go another 25 basis points just to be sure.
And will that be enough to stave off a recession that seems to be heading our way?
No, it will not be enough because it's not about interest rates. It's about the uncertainty related to Trump, quite frankly. The unemployment rate is rising. The labor market is weakening. The housing market is basically in a recession. So it's really the uncertainty that has to be removed, and that will take a while. Interest rates will help at the margin.
You know, we have these stories out of the U.S., like the U.S. government now pondering taking a stake in giant chipmaker Intel. The rules, as we understand them, about how capitalism and the markets work seem also very uncertain. Will that create additional kind of waves? I mean, how do you, as an economist, even factor in the unknown of what might be ahead?
That's very difficult, quite frankly, because you have to get into Trump's head, which is very difficult to do. I will tell you that when people say it's not about the money, it's always about the money. And when it comes to tariff, it is about the money. I think that what the administration in Washington trying to do now is to find a number in terms of tariff that will generate a lot of money, but also will keep the economy going, the U.S. economy. So 10, 15% tariff rate globally is a reasonable number that will give them about $320 billion to pay for all the things that they want to do. So at the end of the day, it's not about getting the jobs back. It's not about more manufacturing in the U.S. It's about the money.
And of course, for us, that could well mean that our free trade deal is replaced by a new deal that has some form of tariffs. Have we started to look at the math on that? What does our economy look like on this side of the border if we have 10 to 15% tariffs?
Yes, it depends really where. I think that in our case, it will not be across the board. It will be by sector. So clearly, if you are in steel, you are worried. If you are in a lumber, you are really worried. Definitely dairy, worry. If you are in the auto sector to an extent, but beyond that, I don't think you should be worrying too much because it will be by sector. Regardless, it will be a significant factor impacting Canada that will reduce our ability to grow and clearly will force us to focus more and more internally and make sure that our economy is self-sufficient, including productivity. So we have to realize that this is not the end. This is just the beginning.
So good to have you, Ben. Always appreciate your time.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Benjamin Tal, Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC. Coming up, the federal government has an ambitious agenda to cut spending and also rebalance Canada's economy. We've got a view on both. Stay with us. Welcome back. The federal government is aiming to cut its own spending sharply, but what might that look like? Here's a look by the numbers. The goal is to cut as much as $13 billion in department spending by the 2028-29 fiscal year. That starts with 7.5% in reduced program spending next year. The directive comes as the feds up their spending in some places, like an additional $9.3 billion on defense this fiscal year. It's part of an overall promise to cap the growth in the amount of government spends on its own operations to 2% a year through 2029. And of course, comes after a period of high growth in government employment, up 40% between 2015 and 2025, with federal government employees now totaling 357,965. The cuts don't end this year. Next year, ministers are asked to find a 10% reduction and reach 15% by year 3. Overall, some estimates put the total job losses ahead at 57,000 public servants between 2024 and 2028. But there are some carve-outs. The total spending subject to these potential cuts is $175 billion, according to the CD Howe. A review of government spending is welcome, but some experts are cautioning that the approach might be a bad one, targeting across-the-board cuts instead of looking more closely at program results. John Lester is a fellow in residence at the C.D. Howe Institute and a former federal government economist. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
So you've done this research work that looks at this question, and it's in some ways it's obvious, John. We should look at what we do well, maybe look at whole programs that should disappear. That isn't how we tend to go about it. Why do governments instead prefer this sort of across-the-board, much more thinly layered cutting approach?
Well, I think it's a question of wanting to get things done quickly and show some results in a short period of time, so that it'll take a lot of time to go through all the programs and identify which programs really aren't performing very well. And this government has decided that they would rather get results soon and maybe trading off a little bit on the efficiency of the cuts. If it were up to me, I would take a broader approach, like I wouldn't exempt nearly as much of spending that's been exempted, and I would select the programs after a careful review, so that you would have this process play out over a period of 3 years, so you can really take an in-depth look at your programs and identify those programs that really aren't either consistent with the current priorities or aren't meeting their objectives in a proper way.
I mean, it would make so much sense taking longer. Of course, you can see that politically that would be difficult, but still might be the right thing to do. In the past, have we had success where governments actually say, we're getting rid of this whole program, or even, let's say, God forbid, a whole department, but that we're doing something that's not producing the results we want, and we want to do something else, and we need all the money from one place to go to somewhere else? Is that too dramatic an option?
Well, I think that's kind of the thing you'll want to do. You want to have somebody at the center deciding what your priorities are, and to a certain extent, the government has announced its priorities by exempting so much of program spending. But I think you want to have somebody at a central authority deciding what the government wants to spend in which areas, and then maybe ask departments to indicate how their programs are fulfilling priorities. And if they don't, well, then it's a good reason to get rid of the program. And that would be a very good start. Another good start would just be to put a cap on day-to-day spending, salaries and other operating costs. Then you would force managers to realize some efficiencies without imposing anything very drastic, but there would be a chance to improve the productivity of the public service. And there's some interesting initiatives underway now that could be built on. People are looking at indicators such as how long it takes to process a passport, and that if you twin that with maintaining service standards, it's a very good proceed to try and get something that's measurable and improve it. And I think that you want to build on that kind of initiative by putting a bit of a cap on the day-to-day spending, right, so that managers will have the proper incentives.
John, so good to have you for this. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Talk to you again. Bye.
John Lester is a fellow in residence at the C.D. Howe Institute and a former federal government economist. Canada is well aware, of course, of the need to diversify our trade away from the U.S., but doing that without considering how to do things differently would be a missed opportunity. Jim Stanford is director at the Center for Future Work. Thanks for being with us, Jim.
My pleasure, Amanda. Thank you.
So let's start with this notion that if we're going to change what we do, we should think about how we do things differently. We do export raw materials in this country. We talk about diversifying. What's your suggestion about how to shift our thinking so that we don't just try to do more of the same?
Well, we have seen a real shift in the composition of our exports over the last couple decades since the turn of the century. Right now, we're exporting so much natural resources and unprocessed primary goods, about half of our merchandise exports. So at the same time as we're trying to diversify where we sell our exports, I think we also have to think about the composition of what we sell. And that's where we're going to need to revitalize our value-added or technology-intensive manufacturing sectors, digital technology, other innovation-intensive sectors, in addition to obviously continuing to export some of our natural resources.
And when we put new dollars into play, as we are going to do, to the tune of probably tens and tens of billions, would you suggest that pipelines and other big raw material resource infrastructure projects may not be the best way to spend that money? How do we juice our manufacturing sector, which is what you're talking about, right? We actually want to produce things here.
Yeah, certainly. So far, a lot of the discussion in Canada about how we protect ourselves under Trump has been about export-oriented infrastructure, mostly resources, oil pipelines, for example. But our industries in general have really underinvested in machinery and equipment and technology and innovation. So I am concerned that, first of all, so much of the policy attention, but also so much of the dollars are going to get sucked up by a discussion about another pipeline, for example, whereas our value-adding industries, auto, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, other technology-intensive industries, these are the things that Trump is really going after with his sector-specific tariffs. Those industries are going to need capital, they're going to need markets, and they're going to need policy attention. So I am concerned that doubling down on resource exports is not going to meet the challenge that we face under Trump.
Would you be at least partially satisfied if we spend some of our time and attention on resources, critical minerals being one place that we would think of as sort of a future-proofed resource? We're going to need these things for green technologies, but also look at processing and upgrading and all of the sort of upstream stuff that we should be doing that will bring us the value add.
Yeah, 100% you're right. Critical minerals are a great example. That is a resource that we've got in Canada and we should leverage it. But we shouldn't just dig it out of the ground and sell it to someone else to process it and manufacture it into expensive products that they then sell back to us, whether that's America or whether that's Europe or Asia. We should be doing more of that work ourselves because that's where the value add is going to come from. And that's ultimately how we'll become a sovereign country that can stand up on its own 2 feet.
You know, we've been waiting for even the news of what the big projects will be on that kind of list. The provinces and the feds met, but we are also waiting for sort of movement on breaking down internal barriers. There's lots of things that just take a long time. Do you think things are moving too slowly, or is this the nature of this kind of thing?
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job, actually, of focusing attention and trying to get things done quickly. And all of those dimensions are going to be important. The selling more to ourselves in Canada is going to be part of offsetting the loss that we'll experience on exports to the U.S. Strengthening trade ties with the rest of the world are also important. So I do think that we are moving, and we've certainly got a sense of the urgency. I am just concerned, though, that we start to look at, one or two particular big build projects as a magic bullet that will somehow protect us. We need a holistic strategy that looks at all of our regions, all of our resources, all of our industries, and tries to build a Canada that's sovereign and value-adding and can stand on its own feet.
I know we'll be hearing more from you on this. We appreciate your time today, Jim.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Jim Stanford is director of the Centre for Future Work. Coming up, Ontario's finance minister has pledged to stand behind businesses hurt by U.S. tariffs. He's with us after this. Ontario is taking the brunt of the tariff pain. The province has put aside billions to help businesses cope, including money for those struggling with tariffs and more money this week to help retrain workers. Peter Bethlenfalvy is Ontario's Minister of Finance. Thanks for being with us, Minister.
Always a pleasure.
So I did want to start with kind of an update on the state of affairs when we heard from the CFIB that a massive number of businesses say another 6 months is too much for them. How is it feeling in terms of how the province's businesses are coping with the current state of affairs?
Well, it's incredible how innovative, ingenious companies are. They're adapting, but for companies that are really getting hit square on, like the steel industry, the aluminum industry, with 50% tariffs, the auto sector 25%, non-CUSMA 35%. It's been a challenge. So we've been there in the past for them, helping with deferrals and other tax measures, and then we're helping them again with this fund that we've announced, another $1 billion.
Yeah, and that fund should, of course, act as a sort of a backstop for businesses that need it. What have you seen? In some ways, it's still early because business, of course, a lot of us, let's agree, Minister, we're hoping this would end before now even. Are you starting to see more take-up of those kinds of programs?
Well, certainly, uncertainty is the key word here, because we thought we'd have a deal by July 9th, and the target was July 21st. August 1st, and we're not sure south of the border they even know where they want to go on this. So uncertainty is the new normal, if you will. We acted early. I mentioned the deferrals. We deferred $9 billion of provincially administered taxes, so a company could select if they didn't want to pay that, kind of get an interest-free loan for 6 months. The take-up's been very good on that. We did launch some other funds, Trade Impacted Communities Fund and something called the Ontario Together Trade Fund, which is helping companies in the transition. And then, of course, this billion with, as you mentioned, liquidity. The take-up, it's still early, so there is some. They are adapting to the new market, but we're going to be there to help workers and businesses should they need help.
The other thing that just happened that will be maybe a shock to some, but it's the removal of that $800 de minimis amount that U.S. travelers can bring back or that Canadian business can ship across duty-free. Small businesses will be hit by that. Are you beginning to kind of run the math on what that might do? Because the other side of the equation here is your own finances. Businesses that have lower revenue pay lower taxes, and that means that there's less, of course, to pay for all kinds of things.
Well, our balance sheet is very strong, and that's why we're in a position to be able to help small businesses. As you know, we've got small business taxes. I just mentioned the deferrals that many of the small businesses can defer paying taxes to help with liquidity. But there's no question, measures like that from south of the border are cost not only on businesses here, but on consumers in the U.S. It's a tax on the U.S., and we've seen this story over and over again, whether it was Alexander Hamilton in the 1700s to the 1800s, where we had tariffs in 1812 and 1865 and beyond, and in the 1930s. They were always rescinded, and this will happen again because people don't want to pay an increased tax through tariffs. Businesses don't like it. Consumers don't like it. We just have to get through this period, and we will.
And we, of course, have some cards up our sleeve. I mean, in the past, the Premier has talked about things like electricity shipments. There are things we could do that would get attention fast. Retaliatory tariffs, of course, are very controversial, but might there come a time when we should actually bring to bear some of the really strong cases we can make with our U.S. neighbors?
Well, Premier Ford, I like to call him Captain Canada, has been on the leading edge, not only with some of those measures. In fact, it's my ministry that's responsible for the alcohol, pulling that off the shelves. But he's out on the airwaves down in the U.S. almost every day, talking how tariffs are bad for U.S. consumers, Canadian consumers, that it's a lose-lose. So we'll continue that fight. I think that the message is, look, we can't change the uncertainty south of the border. I'll let the federal government talk about the tactics, but we can do a lot here in Canada. Interprovincial trade barriers, which we've been very aggressive at removing, nation-building projects that we can be very aggressive putting forward, and procurement policies. These are all things that we don't need any support elsewhere around the world. We can do all of that here in Canada.
So good to have you for this. Appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Amanda.
Peter Bethlenfalvy is Ontario's Minister of Finance. Time for the takeaway, and when benefits get lost in translation. The province of Ontario recently joined a host of other employers with a return-to-work mandate. From 3 days a week in office now for public employees, by October, the requirement will rise to 4 days. And in January, all employees are expected back in the office in person 5 days a week. Predictably, the change was met with opposition from employees and, in the case of the public sector workers, also their union. But the province is far from alone. Many large companies are moving in the same direction, notably Canada's big banks, which all have 4-day-a-week mandates in place this fall. It's an easy guess that a full week at work is pending for those employees sometime soon. For the banks and other big companies, there are multiple reasons that back to the office makes sense, including existing leases on massive amounts of office space available for them to use. And there may be arguments to be made about collaboration, business culture, and mentorship that deserve a closer look. But the other side of the ledger has some arguments about work-life balance, benefits to employees, and lessons we all learned during the pandemic that we would be wise to remember. How we work didn't really get much of a rethink before that, and so was still designed off an industrial model that is hopelessly outdated. Many jobs can be done independently and with a little help from technology, sometimes even more effectively than in person. Meanwhile, workers can be close to their homes and other obligations, cutting needless and costly commutes right out of the equation. It felt like blinders falling off for hundreds of millions of workers globally, that our jobs don't have to be so distinct from our lives. And in fact, allowing flexibility can in some cases increase productivity. It's true, not all jobs can be done remotely, another clear lesson from the pandemic, and businesses have to realize the inequity that can create. But those are issues that can be dealt with like any other compensation scheme if work from home is treated as a benefit of a job. My takeaway? It's human nature to stray back to the status quo. But when a change is so beneficial to so many, it's worth giving it your best shot, even if that's hard to do. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.